Should have got some bourbon before I play.
Some bourbon?
Bourbon?
I like bourbon. All right.
So do I.
Sure.
It's the only booze I pretty well I have in the house right now. So here I am drinking soda water like a sucker.
Drinking plain
It's
water.
Song Talk Radio with Michael, Neel, Phil, and the gang.
Welcome back to the show about songwriting and other things that often distract us. Joining me today, as usual, are the members of the Happy Fun Robot Talk Gang. Mr. Neel Modi, how you doing, Neel?
I'm very well, thank you.
How about you, Michael Proudfoot?
I also am very well.
Yes, I am here too as well.
Actually, if you followed
How is your human spirit?
if you followed data on Star Trek, you'd never use contractions. So I'm
That is
doing well.
correct.
Wouldn't work for an Android.
That is true.
I am doing well, yeah.
That's true.
Just a bit of Star Trek trivia for a songwriting podcast.
Oh,
That's right.
excellent.
And next week, join us for Trek Talk radio while we talk about Star Trek.
Talk about the songs on Star Trek.
While we are song talking out there in listener land, you can send us your questions or comments or your insights to feedback@songtalk.ca, and we'll try to do our best to respond to them. And if not, we still read each and every one. Hey there. Also out there in YouTube land, if you're watching us, why don't you click on the like and the subscribe buttons down at the bottom there. That actually helps the show quite a bit by getting YouTube to recommend it to other folks who like all things talking and all things song, because that would be very nice. So we got a few things to talk about on the show today. I had a bit of an epiphany that I thought I'd share with you guys.
Yes.
So I've been playing my Donner drum set, the E-drums I bought a while ago, and having a real fun time with that. And it's been really interesting because, I mean, I can play sort of time and crap around with playing drums, but I've been trying to play a bit more seriously, playing with a metronome. And playing drums is a really interesting thing because you have to be very in the moment. And I guess, Neel, you'd understand this. You have to be very much in the moment. Like when you're playing guitar, sometimes you can sort of wander a bit. Your mind can sort of go off a bit. But with drums, you have to be very, very present in each and every second because otherwise the drumming just falls apart. It's been very interesting.
Is that the way initially, Neel? Does that go away after a long time?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're doing, but when muscle memory kicks in, you're obviously not thinking about it so much. You're just feeling your way through it. But there's also a flow, right? Like this is actually something I learned when I watched a Neel Peart video when he was being interviewed about playing drums when he was studying with a jazz drummer, Gruber. What's his name? Anyway,
Hans Gruber.
Anyway, he studied with a jazz drummer like years after Rush started.
He changed up his playing style.
He changed up his playing style, and he was talking about how when he learned from the jazz drummer, everything is about a continuous motion. You're not hitting every drum or hitting a specific drum on any one beat, but your body's always moving with the 16th notes, with the swing, with the groove. Right. And when you say you got to be present in every moment, you're present, your body's present and your mind is present. That doesn't mean you're hitting everything on every note.
No.
But you feel all the subdivsions.
Yeah.
Fun for a Rush song. Not intended. Donner lit up. But yeah, I mean it's kind of an abstract thing, but that is kind of how it feels.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting experience, actually. Because I play guitar and I play bass and keyboards as well, and this is the first time I've actually ever played drums in any kind of focused way. And I play at least every day or every other day, and it's been a very interesting experience. I think it's going to influence the rest of my playing. So,
are you following Drumeo on Facebook?
I am not.
There's a thing on Facebook called Drumeo, which is really cool. They're constantly posting videos with like little tips about exercises and ways to do this and ways to do that. And they're pretty informative and really It's good
okay.
bite-sized material, and it's all really, really high-end, like really valuable. And they're right about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Just always
Yeah.
the danger.
Yeah, no, it's been a very fun experience for me. So I just thought I'd share that. It's an interesting thing about being present when you're playing, you know, and not tense, but actually kind of right there in the moment, you know. And it's tough sometimes when you're playing. You're thinking about what you have to do with your hands, or you're trying to remember what the lyrics are. But when you're just playing drums, it's a very different kind of focus. It's been very interesting. So. If anyone else out there in listener land has had experience with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So, yeah. So, one of the questions I had, thought about it the other day.
Are we going
Yeah,
into
like-
the show now?
Well, I guess we are getting into the show.
Do we need to set up what we're doing today?
Well, we're just having a host show where we're going to be asking questions, I think. That's it. And so the question I have is, and I'd like to actually hear from our listeners too. So you can send us an email to feedback@songtalk.ca and let us know what you thought. When did songwriting become songwriting with a capital S for you? So when did songwriting become the thing that you studied as a pursuit in and of itself, apart from playing your instrument, apart from singing, but that the craft and the pursuit of songwriting as an art form in and of itself, separate from everything else, start for you? And let's start with you, Michael.
Well, I'll see how concise I can be about this. So I've always been into music. Like when I was a little kid growing up in Northern Ireland, you know, the Beatles coming on to the scene sort of coincided with me when I was like 4. So I always loved music, but didn't play it till I was, I guess, a teenager. And I was growing up in Newfoundland, where there was a big folk scene, a big country scene, you know, a lot of acoustic instruments. And I remember getting 245s from a friend of from my cousin in Scotland. It was a brain salad surgery from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Pretty Vacant, the Sex Pistols. Well, one of those two became a Frisbee. The other got, you know, played to death on my record player. So I was into punk and noisier music. And so I didn't really have much of a scene in Newfoundland. So it wasn't until I came to Toronto and went to college that I actually played in a band with like-minded people. But our songwriting, then we did a lot of covers, and that's how I learned music. And, you know, it wasn't very sophisticated. And my performing sort of segued into acting. And then it was only years later that I kind of went back to playing music. And it was with a different focus. You know, a lot of the lyrics before were abstract or stupid or gibberish or whatever. And I kind of came back to it with a focus. Okay, I just want to sing songs about things or people I know, and I want to be able to sing and look someone in the eye and communicate. And that's when I started taking songwriting seriously, about structure and form and working with limitations to actually find a way to teach you things and to make your songwriting better. Like, okay, I'm not going to use any minor chords, or I'm not, you know, I'm going to, like I said, lyrically, I'm going to be very truthful about things. And that was the beginning of it, where I started, you know, being very methodical about, okay, I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do this. And then I would look to people who wrote in different styles like that. So it was, you know, going away and then coming back to it was when I started taking it more seriously. And ironically, from, you know, my rejection of folk music and you know, that kind of genre, this coincided with me basically being a solo act with an acoustic guitar. So I found my way back.
How old were you when that started?
When not really till around 2002, 2004, in there. I remember doing a play in a beautiful theater, and there was a guitar, and I just want to go out on the stage and play. And I realized at that point I'd forgotten so many songs. I only knew about 2. And that was kind of a real kick. I went, okay, I've got to get back into this. And so when I got back into it, it was a lot more personally satisfying because it had a point to it. And there was a journey that I could go on.
How about you, Neel?
Yeah, so I mean, my history is more or less as a instrumentalist. When I was a teenager and stuff, I did start writing very quickly after I started learning how to play piano, and but it was all instrumental music. And I was in a band in high school. I played the drums in a little 4-piece band, but our lead singer did most of the writing. I think our keyboard player did, like, they co-wrote one song, and the bass player and me just kind of came in for the ride. And I remember one song I was like, hey, we should up the tempo of this thing and make it a little more rock. They had a ballad, and I turned it into a rocker just by playing a different beat on it. But I never thought about the songs in a structural sense at that point. I was just like, oh, these are nice songs. I'm just going to play drums along to it, and that was it, right? And it wasn't until many years later, really, when I joined the meetup group and heard other people start talking about songs, right, and really dissecting them and analyzing them and picking them apart, that it kind of shifts your mindset and be like, oh, there's actually a discipline here. There is actually, it's not just a bunch of random things happening or sheer luck or divine intervention or anything like that. There's actually a craft to this thing, even though this is before YouTube videos or books on songwriting, at least that I knew of. And so at that point, I think I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a gradual building up of, I'm starting to take this a little more seriously. And the other thing was, after we started the podcast, I did Pat Patterson's songwriting course on Coursera.org, and that really opened my brain up to lyric writing, because he focuses a lot on lyrics and ideas and prosody and all those sorts of thematic things and conceptual things. And I think that really was, if there's one turning point for me, it's really that, as in approaching this discipline with some measure of craft. And I think there was an idea that I heard, and actually wrote a blog post about this, a very short one, about the difference between an amateur and a professional songwriter. Because on the podcast here and at the meetup, we get a lot of quote unquote amateur songwriters. And when I looked into it, it was like amateur. If you look at the Latin derivation of the word, it comes from amour, like the French amour, whatever the Latin is. So it means you have a love of something. So if you love songwriting, you're an amateur. That doesn't say whether you're making money off of it as a professional would do. And it doesn't say anything about the quality of your work either, right? If you're doing it as a hobby or if you're doing it as a professional. So at that point, your mind kind of switches and be like, okay, I'm an amateur songwriter, but I'm going to do things the way the pros do. I'm going to pay attention to the details. I'm going to really approach this with a high level of craft and work at it until I'm happy with it and really try and elevate it. And I can honestly say that I'm a better songwriter now than I was, 10, 15, 20 years ago, for sure. Right. So I think it's that discipline and just bringing it to the consciousness that kind of makes you think, I'm a serious songwriter, and that's all it takes. How about you, Phil?
Well, it's sorry, Michael. Were you going to?
I was just going to say the same thing. And Phil, what was the moment for you?
Well, because I think I was thinking about this, and I sort of wanted to get your impression, because I think my journey to songwriting with a capital S is actually kind of weird. Mm-hmm. So I started playing guitar when I was 13, and I hung out with a bunch of kind of art kids in school, and they had a band and they wrote all their own music. And so that kind of very influenced me. Like, they didn't really do any covers; they just created their own music. And from that, they very early introduced me into electronic music. So using really old synthesizers, two tape machines, doing all sorts of music concrete stuff. And, I even wound up going to York University and using their electronic music studios. And while I was recording this stuff, I didn't have any kind of real musical trainings, but I knew I needed to make things go from point A to point B to point C and all that stuff. And so I did that. So I was always kind of creating music that was just something I did. And then I would, get into bands. And then as I got more serious about being in bands, and, we would be rehearsing 3 times a week and playing on the weekends, and we had management, and it got pretty serious. And I was writing songs for that project and for other projects, but it was just something I kind of did. I didn't really sort of think of it as being anything specific. And then the band sort of broke up, and I just was doing recording stuff at home, and again still writing music, but not really thinking about it. And then when I joined the Parkdale Hookers, which is relatively certainly as a mature in my late 30s. I joined the Parkdale Hookers, which was Mark Jeftovic's band. And I had a song that I wanted to play, and I, he wrote everything, and I said, could I bring the song in and play it? And he says, oh, yeah, sure. And so we started playing it, and he really liked it, and he was very encouraging. So I started writing songs for the band. And I think it was at that point when I started thinking about actually looking into writing as something that was, again, something you thought about, that was a thing separate from playing instruments, that was something different than being part of your career as being something you created. It was an art form. And that's when I started to do things like pulling apart the Beatles songs and, figuring out the chord structures and the melody structures and reading books on it. And it was interesting because it was actually quite late on in my life, even though I had been writing songs and had good Factor grants and stuff in SOCAN. It was only after that point where I started thinking about the structures of songs and the melody development and going into the actual craft aspect of songwriting as opposed to just something I did, which I kind of realized is sort of weird because I think most people...
I actually, sorry to interrupt, Phil, but I don't think it's that unusual. I just know from some producers, they often will have bands come in, and bands that are fairly well known, come into the studio and have no idea what they're doing. And the producer becomes an arranger or, even if you look at the Beatles, they didn't really know what they were doing. And George Martin taught them about songwriting, to a certain extent. And I think there's a number of cases where that happens. So I'm not sure. It might have felt like a strange late blooming journey for you, but I think it does happen fairly frequently that successful bands even, definitely bands that have been together for a long time, don't really think about their craft until they get in the studio. And then they have someone going, okay, that bridge is too long and that's too short, and that you could put that in front and use your chorus as a, often they've never thought about doing that until someone has that objective look at it and goes, okay, the song is constructed of pieces that we can pull apart and move around and actually make, make the trajectory stronger or make it just a more effective piece of music. Mm-hmm. And so, I had heard stories like that before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sometimes when some of these really young songwriters come out to the meetup, it's always so impressive because they're like 20 and they're so educated and so conscious and so focused on the craft of songwriting, and I just go, wow, man, I wish I was paying attention back then because I would have been further along.
Yeah. Well, there's also the internet. That's a great educator for younger musicians today. Yeah, even
there's more resources.
Remember when you first could get tabs online?
Oh yeah,
it made it easy. Like before that, you listen to a record over and over and over again, or if maybe you could buy a cheat book at a music store. But figuring out songs in the old days used to be a little more difficult. And then you could get tabs, and then you have all the YouTube channels where people show you how to play a song or tell you. I think there's a a greater knowledge base younger nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I remember
A lot
reading
more
books
music
on
being made too.
That is
think
true.
as a piano player, we always had sheet music, even popular songs. Easy piano,
Yeah.
easy
Right,
piano.
right.
Those are always the way to go.
Well, I actually tried buying music, and I think that's why I almost rejected learning how to read music, because these would be like, Supertramp, and the chords that actually they had no resemblance to actually what they really played.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because when you're starting out, you don't know where things are falling down. So you just think it's yourself and you feel like you're failing when it wasn't me failing. It was just that the music. I mean, I wish they would have said an interpretation of Supertramp as opposed to,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because there's a number I would go through looking at Beatles songbooks, and some would not be right, and then you find one that now if I play that the way it says it, it sounds like the song. Like it would be a real treasure, a treat to find a songbook that actually could help you sound like the band.
I
Because a
do
lot of
have
times
I
it
do
would
have a
be
book.
crap.
I do have a massive hardcover book that I picked up on Amazon for like $50. It's the complete Beatles. It is the scores, like literally every single part, all the harmony parts, all the guitar
my
parts,
God.
all with the tablature and the percussion parts and keyboards and strings and absolutely everything. And there's a few mistakes in it, but by and large, like the Beatles never wrote down anything. Some crazy group of people went and transcribed, and it's every single song they ever recorded. Like the thing is massive, and the font is about this small. It's really tiny, but it's an invaluable resource. Like it's amazing if you really want to see like the level of detail that goes into those things. Amazing.
do you know what the book was called?
I think it was the complete Beatles. If I'm not mistaken, it's on our resources page. It's not
Spelt like complete EAT, right? Like the Beatles spelled Beetle.
Actually, I think it's not, because that was a documentary, wasn't it? Or
It
something.
was also that, but there's also a songbook I think that's spelled.
Okay,
complete.
I'd have to dig it up and check. But I just want to get back to what you were saying, Phil, and I agree with Mike. I don't think it's such an unusual thing. I mean, the reason we all get into wanting to be musicians is because we love music. And when you're starting out, you don't really know why you love music. You feel it in your soul, you feel it in your body. You need to engage with that. I decided to pick up the drums in grade 7 in school band. I didn't know why. I just felt like it was something I wanted to do, and I just did it, right? And started to learn more off of that. And as like every week on the podcast, for example, ostensibly we learn something a little bit new, and something else comes into your consciousness, and bit by bit it becomes into your consciousness. And we've talked about this with Blair Packham and with many other guests on the show, like how much of your songwriting and stuff is in the head and how much is in the heart, right? And like you're talking about, you had the heart first and then you came to the head. Some people may go the other way. I think most people feel it in their heart first before they bring any modicum of cerebral thought to it.
It could depend on where you come from. Like some people, they go to music school and they get together and they make a band coming out of music school, and they probably have much more education about song forms. But then a lot of bands form from like a bunch of guys who hang out and go, hey, we should get in a band, and then you just kind of fumble your way towards it. And it isn't until you hit a studio, you hit something where you actually have to kind of put a formula to what you've been doing instinctively.
Yeah.
I'd never had any training, and I took a weekend intensive on songwriting, and we were all adults. And I was gratified to realize, okay, I had understood a lot of songwriting structure without actually articulating it, about intros and, just all the pieces of a song, and knew how to kind of put it together to make dynamics work. But there were other people there who'd been playing music for ages, and this was news to them. That, okay, so that's a bridge does this, or you could start with the chorus, like just some kind of basic things that maybe they'd never examined it. They had been able to coast on heart and talent for a long time without ever having to look at how the sausages were made.
Yeah, Yeah, and really, it's about imitating what you hear, right? If you grew up on Beatles songs and you just sort of start to sort of copy ish, and build your own songs off of that, you're probably good to go for a long while before you
Yeah, it's true.
actually start thinking about it. If you've got a good ear and you've got a good talent, just to do it, then more power to you. I mean, to be honest, recently, last few years, I'm starting to almost deliberately try to embrace my intuitions more and get less out of my head and not be like theory all the time, and just try and go with what feels right, what sounds right, and never give a mind to whether it makes sense or not. It's just what it is, right?
Yeah, it's one of my, talking about playing other people's songs, because we are kind of snobby art punks. The whole thing was like, oh, we don't play covers. We don't play covers. Or if you play a cover, it's like some weird version of, some B-side that no one else has ever heard of before, because that was cool. And I realized what a huge lost opportunity that is, because you learn so much from covering other people's songs.
That's how I learned to play. I was in a band with a really great rhythm section and a fantastic guitarist, and me. And so we would learn all these songs, and I go, okay, and how do you play that? And what are you doing with your fingers there? And so cover songs are a great way to learn how to play.
Yeah.
But to your point, Phil, you had a different audience, like I was thinking of like the kind of music I played early on was very kind of primitive and it was just to get people up on the dance floor. And so then there was a skill to that. Okay, what kind of music gets people dancing, whereas now later in life, I'm looking at something I can play that actually gets into their heart and, like kind of emotionally affects you. So I don't know if that's kind of the similar journey you're trying to get more instinctive, Neel, and I'm, I guess, going from still trying to find ways to use structure, but to get more emotional or to get more truthful.
You always want to try and fill the gaps that you have, right?
That makes
feel
sense.
like you've done too much of. But when I was in a band in high school, we had a few original songs. We played them, and people would applaud politely. When we whipped out our final song of any set, was always the Clash's "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" And the crowd went bonkers. They loved it. We actually double timed the chorus and stuff. It was great fun, and it was so cool. And the crowd just loved it.
You can get addicted to that, because you wonder why do people play covers? Because when you get a response like that, it's hard to resist.
Yeah.
Very true.
And there's some people that you can, at least in Toronto, I don't know how it is in other countries, you can actually make you used to be able to make a fairly good living as playing covers. You would actually make money, whereas if you played original music, you would get nothing.
Tougher.
Yeah. Whereas, however, I think if you're in New York, the bands have to rent the rooms, so at least we're better than New York. So at least that's something.
Always be a wedding band.
That's true.
Oh, God.
It's all covers.
Well, that'll be when I go to hell. I'll either be doing that or children's
but
theater.
of course, if everyone always played covers, we'd eventually run out of songs. We wouldn't have any original songs.
That's true. But
So that was my question for the day.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Neel, you had a couple of questions too, right?
I was wondering, what does success look like for you as a songwriter? Is there something you're looking forward to be like, yeah, now I find, not that I've made it commercially, but even personally, what does success look like?
I always thought having a hit single, like even a number, like I guess last 2 weeks ago, Chris Ward, like he always wanted to have a number one hit internationally, and he did. Like I always thought that would be great. I know a few people who have had a number one hit, and I thought, oh, that would be great. But since I'm not a professional musician, I don't it's just my hobby. That's not really for me a goal. But there's certain songwriters out there that I just think are fantastic. Whether it's Leonard Cohen or Cole Porter, there's some people that just make these perfect songs, and I just want to keep writing till I can write a great song. Like hopefully, it gets some attention, but it's totally self-satisfaction at this point.
How about you, Phil?
Well, it's different now. When I was younger and I was fronting the bands, I very much wanted to be a rock star, for lack of a better word. I mean, and we worked really hard. I mean, we worked our tails off, and we played lots of crappy shows, and recorded and worked hard, and that's what success would have been to me, which didn't
Making
happen.
a living at being a musician, playing music you wanted to play.
And I do remember when we broke even, how amazing even that felt, going, wow, we covered our costs this month. And that was huge. We had a bank account. And that was a huge change. At different points, it's been different, I think, when the hookers were going, we wanted to, maybe get some airplay. We got a little bit of airplay. A lot in India for some reason. Yeah, we were kind of.
They like that
big in
corporate
India.
punk over there. I don't know.
I guess so. And so that was a kind of success. And I think now it's mostly just, again, sort of writing like great songs. Like I think I'm not really chasing anything at this point, apart from just, wanting to, and not so much write, because I've not had trouble writing, but actually like writing and publishing my songs so other people can hear, and hopefully other people will like them. But I think that's what success looks for me is writing good songs and putting them out there, and hopefully somebody will like them somewhere. How about you?
Yeah, I think by and large the same. I think success to me just looks like writing songs, number one, that I'm happy with, because I think my own standard for what is a good song has changed, and hopefully the bar is a little bit higher. I set the bar a little bit higher for myself. I'm not content to live with sloppy melodies or sloppy lyrics anymore. So success for me is on those small points about, the latest song that I've written. Have I put in the work on it that I'm really happy with it, and I think it's, I don't know if it's perfect, but if I don't have anything else to change on it or nothing else that bothers me about it, then it's a perfect song, and that's a success, right? And as far as, even with the band Bay Shelter, like, we got we thought it was a great success when we got the song that Addie and I co-wrote together on the Mississauga Music Mix CD.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, look at this, we can start handing out the CD, and we're on it,
Yeah.
and that's pretty cool. And
Well, getting recognition from other places is a great
It's
way to
always
measure
nice.
progress.
yeah, and I think that's the other piece of it. But at the same time, you can't hang your hat on that, right? It's a really hard thing to do, and music is pretty subjective. People either like it or they don't. I have to be self-satisfied above and beyond everything else, whether or not anybody else likes it.
Yeah. I'd love to hear
I've had
from their.
people cover songs I've written, and that's another kind of satisfaction
great.
and a good feeling as well.
Yeah,
That'd
that
be
would
great.
be interesting. I actually had, when I did my first album, I heard from this teenager from, I don't know where he was from, but he was like, we really loved your track. I don't even remember what track it was. We're working on a cover of it. And I'm like, that's amazing. I'd love to hear it. And I never heard back from him.
That would be, yeah.
But it was
is
just like,
cool to
I was
hear that.
elated. I was like, this is so cool. Some teenagers picked up on my EP and just wanted to cover one of the songs.
That's awesome. I'd love to hear from our listeners, though, what on both points, when songwriting became a thing for you, and also when and what success as a songwriter. Even that could be wanting to be a professional, someone who makes a living writing songs or performing songs, or just being an amateur, as you say, someone who loves it and wants to focus on it. So
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Michael, did you have a question?
Well, I was curious, when you made the leap or had the epiphany or whatever, when you started taking songwriting more seriously, when you started to think of it as a craft that you could do, was there any music around that time that was influential or inspirational or kind of was something that made you think, oh, yeah, this guy's really got it going on, or this girl. Yeah. Was there any music that coincided with your shift to taking it more seriously?
Well, it's again a bit interesting because back when I was fronting the bands, like everyone else in Toronto, I was trying to sound like the Smiths because that's what basically everyone did. Because people stopped trying to sound like the Pixies and then started to try to sound like the Smiths.
It depends on your circle. Those
true.
neither were the emulator or the idols for my groups, but
But so when I kind of went in with the Hookers, even though we were playing kind of punky stuff and we were writing punky stuff, the things that really I fell in love with was the early Beatles, the really early Beatles, like Rubber Soul and before, where they started. And I always kind of liked that, and I always really appreciated how perfect those songs were and how representative they were as these perfect packaged songs, just done to perfection. They weren't pushing the envelope so much then, but they were just perfectly constructed. There wasn't a note out of place. They weren't sloppy. They were beautiful and tight. And I think that's what I started doing is once Mark started encouraging me to bring more songs in, and I thought, that's how you figure out great songs. Just pull those things apart. And, I got all those early Beatles songs and went through each one, with a fine tooth comb. And even though I'd always listened, loved the Beatles, and even though it was past the point when I was actively listening to them, I knew that's where I wanted to take my inspiration from. So, but it was interesting, Neel, because I thought because Neel and I met actually at the meetup. You were the first person I talked to. And I actually thought you were pretty adept at that point. So I'm sort of surprised that was the point when you sort of after coming to the meetup that you were sort of going, because you seem to be very conscious of songwriting at that point. So that's interesting.
I think I was more conscious of composition at that point. I think the meetup and the podcast made me more conscious of songwriting, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
was there any music or artist in particular that coincided with your taking it more seriously or digging more deeply into it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, the short answer is Rush, only because Rush kind of made the argument for approaching songwriting in a more intellectual sense, like they were the thinking man's band, as people like to put it, and so it kind of gave me that pathway because I'm much more of an intellectual, cerebral person than an emotional from the heart songwriter. And so that kind of gave me the pathway in and be like, okay, I can sort of do it like these guys. And even though my stuff never sounds like their stuff, it's just the philosophy of how you approach or tackle a song. When I first came to the meetup, a lot of people told me, oh, you must be a big David Bowie fan because my stuff sort of sounded like David Bowie. And I'm like, not really. I know his poppy stuff, like that thing he did with Mick Jagger and all that sort of stuff from the 80s, but I don't really know. I know a few of his songs, but not really. So I started listening to more David Bowie. It didn't really fill me as anything. I wasn't like, wow, this is amazing. I was like, meh, okay. But I wasn't really, I'm not that big a David Bowie fan, but you can keep telling me that I must be a Bowie fan and a Frank Zappa fan. I don't know nothing about Frank Zappa. but every once in a while, I'll come in with a song for the meetup, and quite by accident, people would be like, "This is very Beatlesque." I'm like, "Oh, that was not on purpose, but okay, I'll take it," right? Because that stuff is so subconsciously embedded in me that if you come out with something that sounds Beatlesque, it's just going to happen. Right?
How about you, Michael? Was there?
I had, like I said, I've always loved pop music. I love the way that it's, so many genres come and go. And then I worked at Much Music for a bunch of years. So I was really able to consume vast amounts of, current music. But for me, it was Chaos and his album Joyful Rebellion, because I had, I'd been into hip hop and I'd been into all kinds of different music. And here is this album that was so well done and genreless. Like, it's not a hip hop record. It's not, it's not one thing. It's dozens of things. And he was just doing it with such confidence. And it was just kind of like, oh, you don't have to be the Smiths. You don't have to be, rock and roll. You don't have to be this. You can just make songs. And his songwriting skill is so good that he could make any combination of music sound like it was a complete song. You didn't think something was missing or this was just filler. Like, every song on the record was great. And I just listened to it and I just thought, okay, this is, songwriting can be, a really pure expression of who you are. And I thought, oh, that's great. And it just was a really, I don't think anything I have ever written sounds remotely like his music. But it was just the way he approached music that I found really inspiring.
Michael, I've always wanted to ask you, because you were actually a professional actor for a while. How has acting affected the songwriting? Because being an actor, it's very narrative because that's what actors do. Does that sort of affect the way you approach like narrative in the songs? I've always wondered about that.
No, but it might be just because I was a songwriter musician first, and it was actually so. I was in a couple of bands, and one in particular with good friends, but we were self-destructive, and we actually broke up on stage at Larry's Hideaway.
Oh no!
Fist fights and things like
Rock
that.
and roll.
But there would be, I remember we were playing, we had a gig at, I think it was Humber, and our guitarist at the time had some kind of meltdown and was like, I can't go on, I can't go on. And so this would happen sometimes. And so I found myself just having to be like, almost do stand up in front of the audience to just kind of fill time and so I kind of went, screw this. I don't have to carry a band. Why would I just be an actor? I only have to be responsible for myself. And so then I went to Second City and I did that route. And then I thought, let's try to be more serious. And I started getting cast and started to make money at it. And so I went into it from that way. And when I came back to it, it was, I don't think I've ever written songs from character points of view. So I can't say that it has actually had, it's a good question, but I don't think it ever has. I mean, I guess there are artists like Bowie or some people that write from persona basis. And then there are other people that are a bit more, okay, this is me. And this is, in fact, Frank Zappa had a great point about that during the PRMC hearings when they wanted to put warning labels on records that had, foul language or whatever. And he said, it's not like movies or television shows where you can rate it. For better, for worse, when an artist puts out an album, you think that's what he's saying. You think it's him. And so when you put a label on it, you're saying, oh, this artist is explicit or this artist is bad. Like you're branding the person. Because generally, even when you do, like Bowie, write in persona, the audience generally doesn't perceive it that way. They tend to think of it as being the truth of what that person, behind the microphone is saying. But to me, no, I've never, the closest I had was I had written a script for a short film and that didn't happen. So I took the idea of that and I wrote a song from it. I took I wrote the story of that film, but that's about the closest it's ever come.
I thought you might do a lot of story songs because
I do, but not because of any acting. It's just because I like artists like Steve Earle and I just like but again, like even in a band, I had come to it from sort of a writer point of view, and I would just bring in lyrics that I'd written, and then the band would start putting music to it, and it was a bit later that I started bringing whole songs. But it was, I'd never really thought of a connection between the acting world or the writing world.
It's an interesting question. This whole question of persona and writing from someone else's point of view, because that's, like you say, Phil, like that's kind of what acting is. Like you're invested in a different persona, someone else's. And I've done that I've done that more than I've written songs from my own experience, because obviously everyone else is more interesting than I am. But
present company excluded.
Yeah, present company excluded. But it was interesting to me. A few years back, I wrote a song called Panspermia, because I saw this YouTube video about this notion that life on Earth was deposited from some other world as some organic goo, went on top of a meteor that didn't get destroyed by our atmosphere and ended up on Earth. And I was like, this is fascinating. This is really cool. I should write a song about this. And panspermia is a great line for a chorus, right? And but when I was writing the lyric to it, I was perfectly, this is obviously not anything to do with my personal experience. I'm writing about a concept, about something else that's not me. But I wasn't happy with it until I injected part of me into it, right? So my approach was that, okay, sure enough, that may have happened, but what it means is that not only are we tied together as a human race, everybody, bleeds red kind of thing, but we're, on a cosmic scale, we're all tied together. We're all part of the same stardust kind of thing, right? So we're all united in that sense. And I wasn't happy with the song until I injected that kind of personal belief part of it, right? So even though you're adopting a different persona, I find that it's not your song until you also invest part of yourself into it. Like it's never 100% from somewhere else, right? That's what I've come to realize.
Actually, that leads me to a question for you, Phil. You talk about the trouble you have with lyrics sometimes. So how does that work to when you write a song to feeling like it's finished? Does that present like you've got the music and the whole thing is really tight, but if the lyrics are still unsatisfying to you, does that mean that the song is still not done?
Kind of. My problem is I'll often come up with a verse and a chorus and sometimes a bridge, but it'll be like one verse. So you're kind of going, I have to do another verse. And then that's always a bit of a struggle.
What's the struggle? Like, do you lose the plot, so to speak? Or have you said everything that you needed to say in the first verse?
No, it's a bit different now, because actually from the meetup and the podcast, I am approaching lyrics a bit differently now, in a way that I never did. Whereas before, I just kind of, I would basically try every word in the English vocabulary at every point until it fit, and then moved on to the next word. So, which is a really long way to write a song.
So do you write the melody first and then try to find words that plug into it?
Very often. Or I'll come up with like the chorus or, key lines and then try to write. And very often, it's like the inspiration kind of goes away and you have to kind of find that again. But very often that's what's prevented songs from being finished, is that they're not fully complete lyrically, just because, I know I even know what I'm wanting to say, but it's, and that's, one of the smart things that Elton John did. Elton John wasn't great at lyrics, so he worked with a lyricist. And I think, that's an important thing to realize where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and then work with someone who has strengths where you don't have strengths,
You mentioned Morrissey, but he stole, if not outright lines, but like there was just a host of angry young men. There was a wave of British playwrights and authors in the 60s who wrote, about the gritty everyday life of working class people, which before that was not considered interesting to write for. And so many of his lyrics, when you kind of go through it now, you go, oh, that's from that book. Oh, that's from this.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And so, he just kind of took, I guess, because he was, a working class lad, but and he knew how he wanted to, or what he wanted to talk about, but he had no shame about just sort of wholesale taking lines and scenarios from these, famous and sometimes not so famous books from a particular literary genre.
Yeah.
And it was only later in his career that he kind of went outside of that.
Well, he even wrote a song about it. Cemetery Gates is all about that. There's always someone somewhere with a big nose who knows, who laughs you, who sets you up and laughs when you fall. About all these basically, don't plagiarize your take-home loans, because he would just, But that's true. That's something I never really thought about doing until recently. Is about using books as a way of finding interesting lines, even though I've read books and said, "Oh, it's a wonderful line," but I just never.
Yeah.
It's like that Steely Dan song. Oh, what is it? Is it "Home at Last," which is the Iliad in a song, and it's just. I mean, they're superlative lyric writers.
Yeah.
But it's just such a wonderful, unexpected thing to come across. This kind of jazz rock song, and then you listen to it and you realize, holy shit, this is about, this is a famous Greek story. So you could steal from books. Find a genre that's been unpillaged.
Maybe I'll just start pillaging. Oh, maybe I'll just start pillaging Morrissey songs.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Turnabout is fair play.
Yeah,
that's true.
Reverse engineer those things. Do you guys find that like I'm a musician for many, many more years than I've been a lyricist. I'm way more invested in my lyrics, my own lyrics, than I am interpreting other people's songs. Like I don't know what a lot of other songs that I listen to are, quote unquote, what are they really about, so to speak. But of course, anything I write myself, I feel like it's intensely important, and it's like, it's valid, and I know, and obviously I know it well because it's my song. But I don't know. I feel like I don't invest that kind of thought into interpreting other people's lyrics. Do you guys get where I'm coming from?
No, I'm the other way. I love dissecting lyrics and love being surprised by cool turns of phrase or even interesting subject matter. Like, oh my God, they wrote a song about that. That's so cool. My own lyrics, I work a lot on them, but I don't feel like, I hope I can communicate what I feel, but it's totally up to how someone else takes it. And once it's out of my mouth, it's out of control.
Yeah, I
true.
don't think it's important what a song is about, what the author thinks it's about, because once it's gone, that's the great thing about music is if you write a song about sandwiches, but it makes someone else think about their father and cheer up, then that's an effective piece of art. You got a response from someone. I don't think it matters what exactly the song is really about, because that's not really the most important. It's how you interpret it and how it connects with you.
And it does depend on the genre too. Like, dance songs, it really doesn't matter. Whereas, I don't know, Dylan, it does matter,
That is true.
Yeah.
Although sometimes you do want to, communicate to another person about getting your freak on, and getting your freak
your
on,
attention, definitely.
and getting your freak on.
Yeah, that's valid. It's perfectly valid.
And then later on, turning the freak off, and
That's
having a nice cup of tea. It just depends on the song.
That's what I end up finding, is that when I do try and listen closely to lyrics, it's either too obscure that I have no idea what they're talking about, or it's so like simple and it's just, it's getting your freak on, and there's not much to it. Like it seems to be one extreme or the other. Yeah. It's very rare that I listen to a song and actually try to listen to the lyrics and be like, oh, that's really profound and insightful and interesting and whatever. It seems to be,
That's one of the reasons I like country music, is when it's good, it's it's just it doesn't have to be really complicated, but there seems to be something about the crafting of the songs. There's a tradition in country music of respecting songcraft, and the way that in a very conservative genre they manage to tell stories about all kinds of outrageous people and situations. It seems to require a real skill. And so musically, it's not necessarily my favorite type of music, but lyrically, there's some just great writers in country music.
Well, it's so based in story songs. It's all about the
Yeah,
writing
and
these
basic
stories.
emotions, and it's regular folk often, but having extraordinarily deep lives. It's quite wonderful.
Yeah, it's definitely music, and then there's the the Leonard Cohen thing, which some people hate and some people love. Although I've always felt Leonard Cohen is usually better when covered by other people.
It's always that.
Yeah, well, I think the same about Bruce Springsteen. So
Yeah, that's true. It's music is such a subjective thing, I guess. But I definitely love to hear from our listeners out there. What your thoughts on when songwriting became a thing for you, what successes for you as a songwriter, and what music was instrumental in getting you to pay attention to songs, because that's an interesting thing, I think.
yeah, please share with us, and then we will share it with everyone else.
Yeah,
Oh, the neighbors are turned up their stereo again.
that's true.
Keep it down.
Well, this was an interesting show. I hope
good show, guys.
everyone enjoyed it, and it's. I certainly learned some stuff about you guys, which
Yeah, me
I think is
too.
pretty good after all these years. And with that music, that means that's all the time we have on Song Talk Radio. We do want to hear from you, so send us your comments on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Song Talk Radio, or send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca. If you're listening on the podcast stream, why not check out the YouTube channel for live performances and full episodes now that we're in these boxes. And if you're on YouTube, you should subscribe, because then you'll become famous. That's a guarantee. Warning, not a real guarantee. Subscribe today to the Song Talk Radio podcast on your favorite podcast provider. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at the site. You can find the links to all the books, products, and web services we mentioned here on the show on the resources page. And wherever you are in the world, you can always join us for the next Song Talk meetup on Zoom. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend. So stop by songtalk.ca to find the link for that. And most of all, we'd like to thank you, the home listener, for joining us. You can follow Neel at
neelmodi.com.
And how about Michael? How can people get more of you?
Oh, I can get a little bit more of me on Instagram at Proudfoot420.
You can get some more of me at philemery.ca. And stop by the website at songtalk.ca to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest on this very show. Stay safe, everyone, and keep on writing. See you next week.
So long.
So long.
Farewell.
Auf Wiedersehen to you. Enter.
We don't have enough German music.
We do. Falco,
Hot potatoes.
the Bowie version of Heroes in German.
That's true.
How do you analyze a lyric like that? Rock Me Amadeus? Great.
Oh, I don't. Some songs you just let them be. It's better for everyone.
Are you saying that Rocky Amadeus didn't bring us a tear to your eye?
No.
Not
You said-
from the lyrics.
There's been a country song in Germany.
That's true.
It's the Hasselhofer.
He's big in Japan.
No, in Germany too.
In Germany too, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. All right. Well, that was a fun show.
There.
Yeah,
That's good.
Yeah, it's interesting.
interesting stuff.
We
And
are
it's-
interesting.
Turns
Well,
out.
And the fact that I'm still learning, the fact that I'm still learning new stuff about you, Neel, after all these years,
Yeah.
it's all part of the
part
part of the
journey.
magic.
Part of the experience.
We need to talk more, Phil.
We do.
We just don't talk enough.
That's true. Anyways,
It
All
used
right.
to be about the music. I've sold out now.
that's true.
Oh, I wish. I'm dying to sell out.
I know,
Sell
right?
out.
Where do I line up?
I'd sell it for a dinner at like Denny's or something. I'm not proud. Whatever you get.
Hold out for a nice steak at Barbarians or something.
Are there any Denny's in Canada? I don't think so, eh?
Yeah.
Are there?
So
I think I've never seen one except in the U.S. And when you go in the U.S., they're all over the place.
they're terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my
they are.
God. Awful. I went to one and it was just,
No. It's like bad diner food. What are you gonna
Yeah,
do?
there's a Denny's in Canada. There's Denny's.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Mike's always so good. He's always like looks stuff up when one of us has a question that the rest of us are just
I wonder.
random answers. Mike's actually like
Denny's
stuff.
has over 1,700 restaurants in the United States, Canada, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Japan, Honduras, New Zealand, Qatar, Philippines, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, Curacao, and the United Kingdom.
Qatar.
So, yeah, hard to
Well,
avoid them.
If anyone needs a reason to go to Costa Rica, there you go.
Oh, there's better reasons than that. Costa Rica's beautiful.
Go to the Denny's, come back. Rainforest.
Costa Rica, it was basically fishing and agrarian, and so they've never had war. They don't even have a standing army. They did have a
Great,
kind
let's
of
invade.
civil dispute, but I think it was because it's divided by a mountain range, and the rains washed the road away, so they just fuck it, we won't have our fight. So yeah, it's I mean, a lot of Central American countries now have kind of fallen prey to American influence, but it used to be just a paradise.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Interesting. Next week on Geography Talk.
That's true.
Exactly. Sociology, politics. Look, there's an internet. What do you want to know?
We got it all.
Is that new?
Not fake news.
You've got the internet too? Oh, neat.
I've got the Internet 3.
Oh,
There
excellent.
you go. All right.
Version
All right.
3.0.
All right, lads.
All right, guys.
Good
It was a
show.
yeah,
We'll
good show.
talk in a few days.
Right.
Take care.
Talk to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers.
See you.